Alright guys, so we have some crazy Nintendo Switch 2 updates, and some of these updates are going to be things that I think a lot of you guys are going to like, especially things to be looking forward to, as I think it is probably one of the most important updates to the Nintendo Switch 2, as this is going to show how physical media could truly look onto the Switch 2 in the coming weeks. Without further ado, let's jump straight into the news.
Listen guys, Editor Max here. I know someone is just ready to type it into the comments. Trust me, I see it. I didn't see it before I was recording, but I definitely see it since I'm editing this video, and it pains me as I continue to edit this, as I know the comments are coming. I see that I have a bad hair day into this video. I can't really say much other than, the next video will not be a bad hair day.
Let's jump into what, in my opinion, is the biggest story here. Limited Run Games has announced their annual E3 event. Now, you're probably going to be confused by the fact that I just said E3 and that we are in the month of October. If you haven't been following Limited Run, every year they do a Limited Run E3 event that's not officially with E3, but it always takes part during the week that E3 is supposed to happen. It's been a showcase where they announce new games and new games that are going to be getting physical releases. Now, they haven't been able to do one this year yet because I believe from what I heard from what the owner of Limited Run was saying in their tweets is that they were not allowed to talk about some of these announcements that they have cooking until later into the year. So they ultimately decided that doing the Limited Run E3 event that they typically do in June did not make sense to have happen. And they talked about that they might not do one at all this year. It sounds like now that they've gotten a lot of their announcements done and are allowed to announce some of these things, and it's going to be happening October 29th. I think that this is going to be a very important event to watch, as we're definitely going to be getting some Nintendo Switch 2 announcements here. And I think depending the type of games that Limited Run does here could be very important to the future of physical media when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2. As Limited Run has said in the past that they're not going to be doing anything relating to game keycards when it comes to their numbered releases, and that they've implied a few months ago that they do have Nintendo Switch 2 titles in the works. So I expect to see some of these announcements here. I also think it's important to watch this, as I think it's going to tell us what we should expect from a retail price standpoint when it comes to these Limited Run Switch 2 editions. As something that I pointed out before, there is definitely going to be a price increase when it comes to these physical games from Limited Run because of them having to use that 64GB cartridge, as there's not any smaller cartridge out there yet, but we've talked about in previous videos that the company that does these cartridges for Nintendo are looking to make smaller cartridges. So either way, I think this is important. I don't know if we're going to see game keycard releases. They've hinted that that's probably going to happen in the future, but that's not their decision. That comes down to all the other companies that they work with. The only thing that Limited Run has true control over is when it's a part of their numbered releases. Which, if you looked at Limited Run's games that they've made in the past for the Switch, they have things that is not a part of the number set. That is stuff that they've helped publish, and that's the type of stuff that ends up at other places like GameStop, for example. Either way, I think this is going to be a very interesting showcase, as this showcase always has some pretty crazy announcements there. Either way, I think this showcase is going to be really good, especially with the type of announcements that you can see here. Gets pretty crazy. I mean, they ended it on the Gex trilogy. I think they ended it on the last one with the fact that can't believe I'm saying this, but Bubsy is coming back once again, and I'm sure they're going to end it on something completely unexpected. Maybe they're bringing E.T. from the Atari. Maybe they're bringing that game back. This showcase has also had some pretty important announcements in the past as well. Just for example, last year's showcase is where we got the announcement that Beyond Good and Evil was coming to other consoles. And then, of course, Limited Run announced the physical edition with it within this broadcast. So I think we could be getting stuff like that into the showcase. I know that they've been hyping this up with certain announcements that they were not allowed to show. That's why it got delayed. So I'm definitely looking forward to this event and can't wait to see what we get when it comes to Switch 2 physical copies. All right, we have a rumor coming from Nashweedle. Now, this has been something that has been brewing over the last 2 weeks, that Nashweedle has been throwing hints that a new company is working on Nintendo Switch 2 games. And he's hinted what these games were going to be, how many games are coming, and stuff like that. So let's start with his initial tweet. On September 30th, he posted a tweet saying, "One company, 2 sagas, 3 games, none quote-unquote new, coming to the Switch 2. Something I want to highlight here is that Attack the Backlog actually replied to this tweet saying it would be nice to play one of them on Halloween. Then Nashweedle replied to it saying, "I like it, although you'll have to wait until the 26th. So it sounds like whatever one of these games are going to be is coming out on October 26th for the Switch 2. But it gets even further than that, because now Nashweedle has said what exactly is coming and what the company is and what games are on the way. Remedy Entertainment is the company that he said, Max Payne / Alan Wake, plus we're getting the Max Payne 1 and 2 remake and Alan Wake 2 onto the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, if I'm to guess what's coming on October 26th, it is probably the Alan Wake Remastered working onto the Nintendo Switch 2. As we've seen Alan Wake Remastered on the Switch 1, but if you haven't seen it before, it is one of the worst Nintendo Switch games out there. I am not joking, that is one of the worst third-party games out there in existence, and I don't even think that it works onto the Switch 2. So I'm expecting that they're going to announce that they made an actual proper version of Alan Wake Remaster coming to October 26th as probably like a shadow drop is what I'm expecting, because I know that's how Alan Wake Remaster dropped onto the Switch 1. And it's the perfect game to play as we're approaching the Halloween season. Well, I guess we're going to already be in the Halloween season, but it's not going to be Halloween yet when that game comes out, and that's a great game to play on Halloween. A few things to point out from this, though, is he's talking about Max Payne 1 and 2 Remake coming to the Switch 2, which is a giant third-party game to have, let alone Alan Wake 2. Now, Alan Wake 2 has probably been my most requested third-party game to come to the Switch 2. However, I do understand that that is going to be a task. If you played the game, you're going to realize how the next-gen hardware is very important for that game. And I'm not really sure if the Switch 2 has the capabilities of handling Alan Wake 2, but we're seeing some pretty incredible things already happen with the Nintendo Switch 2, so maybe with DLSS, they will be able to pull this off. Remedy, I don't know if they're hiring a company to do this port or if they're doing it themselves. The one thing that we gotta hope and pray for is it's not the same company that did Alan Wake Remastered that's doing Alan Wake 2 for the Switch 2, because if that's the case, then we're just gonna get another Alan Wake Remastered. Nashweedle has gotten some third-party game stuff correct into the past when it comes to the Switch 2, but this is a rumor, so take it with a big grain of salt. This is probably one of the biggest rumors out there, and we also probably have the most information regarding this right now, as Nashweedle typically does not give so much details like this. So I'm sure once October 26th arrives, we will be able to know if this is true or not. This next one is an announcement of a brand new physical copy heading to the Nintendo Switch 2. And unfortunately, this company is getting a lot of hate, which, to be completely honest, I really don't understand why people are upset about this, as it was pretty obvious that this was going to happen. But Goodnight Universe has been confirmed to have a Nintendo Switch 2 release. But it is a game keycard, and it's going to retail for $30. Now, my whole thing is I don't understand why people are upset here. This game was always going to be a game keycard because this company, it being a indie dev company, was not going to have the funds to do a 64GB cartridge onto this game. On top of that, even if they did have the funds for the 64GB cartridge, this game that's already a pretty high game physically, $30, I think digitally it's like a $10, $15 game, if they did a true physical release for it, it would have been a $50 release. Do you guys realize that a majority of the people walking into like a GameStop, for example, are not going to pay $50 for Goodnight Universe? They would have lost so much money, so I am not surprised by the fact that this is a game keycard release. I think a lot of you guys need to understand that with games like this, particularly when it comes to the indie dev scene, if they don't have a good publisher behind them, And if it's a release that's not exactly that expensive digitally, they're not going to go the 64 gigabyte route. We just gotta hope in the future that this company that does the cartridges is able to make small cartridges soon, because we're going to be seeing more game keycard releases like this when it comes to the indie dev scene. And I'm sure that this company could have gone to someone like Limited Run, but Limited Run is probably going to be very selective with what games they do, because this is something that would have not sold for them. And yeah, hopefully, as I said before, my prediction is that by the time June arrives, that's when we'll have smaller cartridges. That will solve a lot of the problems that the Switch 2 is having with certain companies going the game keycard route. This next one is a little bit old, but I wanted to put it into this video and give you guys my take on this. Atlus was talking about how putting Persona 3 Reload onto the Nintendo Switch 2 and how they were considering also putting it onto the Nintendo Switch 1. I wanted to go over some of the comments that the dev team said regarding this topic. They talked about how that this was always the plan to have Persona 3 Reload onto the Nintendo Switch. They just couldn't get a development kit in time, and they really wanted it to come closer to when they released all of the other platforms with it. They also talked about how they were testing it onto the Nintendo Switch 1, but there was so much frame rate issues regarding it that it didn't really make sense to have it come out for the Switch 1. They said they would have had to delay it an extra year to have it come out on both the Switch 2 and Switch 1. Which, if you guys haven't played the demo, you can play it on the Switch 2, and you can see that there's some questionable things done to the Switch 2 edition of this game, such as the frame rate, but that's going to be a story that we talk about when the game actually comes out and we can play the initial version, not this demo, because hopefully it gets better. But what I thought was a little bit interesting is the fact that they couldn't get it running on the Switch 1, which I'm not a game dev. I have seen the impossible be done though onto this Nintendo Switch 1. And I know that Persona 3 Reload was on the PlayStation 4, for example. And I know that Persona 5 Royal was on the Switch 1, and that game runs absolutely amazing onto the Switch 1. And it's hard for me to believe the fact that they could not get Persona 3 Reload onto the Switch 1. And I also feel like they have done an incredible lazy job with the Switch 2 version of Persona 3 Reload, because this is running at 30 frames per second. And I feel like, again, I'm not a game developer, but I feel like that this game could have ran close to 60 frames per second, if not 60 FPS onto the Switch 2. So I just don't know how I feel about these comments that Atlus/Sega has said. I don't know. I really don't know how to feel on it. I guess once the Switch 2 version arrives, we'll have a clearer understanding. I want to hear from you guys, though. Do you like the comments that they're saying here? I don't know. I also think it's interesting, if you look back when Persona 3 Reload was getting leaked before its initial announcement, it was being shown for the Nintendo Switch 1. So it sounds like the Switch 1 had a version and it was going to happen, and then by the time it got announced, it just was no mention. For our last story, we're going to be talking about Star Wars Outlaws. Ubisoft has done yet another update to this game, improving the visuals and frame rate regarding this game, and fixing any glitches that was happening. Which, if you guys haven't heard, Ubisoft has done this a few weeks ago, where they were improving the graphics, the frame rate, the visuals, all of that. They're continuing to do so much to this Star Wars Outlaws Switch 2 edition that I think is truly incredible and super exciting to see for future third-party support from Ubisoft, because it seems like Ubisoft really cares about having a good Switch 2 version out there. And if you haven't seen Star Wars Outlaws, it's looking pretty incredible onto the Nintendo Switch 2, which is leading towards a lot of people saying that whatever Ubisoft has coming to the Switch 2 should be looking just as well, considering the treatment and care that they've given to Star Wars Outlaws for the Switch 2. So overall, it's exciting to see and cool to see that they're frequently giving care to it with these free updates. Well guys, that's everything I have for you. I definitely want to hear your guys' take on everything that we talked about. I think if this Remedy Entertainment thing is true, where we're getting all of this Switch 2 support, I think that's going to be very interesting. And if Alan Wake 2 truly can run onto the Switch 2, there should be really no complaints from third-party developers at this point, because that is going to be a huge statement. And to anyone saying that the Switch 2 is a weak system, I'm just saying, if Alan Wake 2 does truly look good and has no frame rate issues, I think we can throw that out the door with people saying that, because that is a true next-gen game right there. But guys, make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all that good stuff in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.